So guys, just before I start this video, I want to let you all know that I'm actually ill at the minute. I've been literally bedridden for the last 2 days, so if my voice sounds a little bit different, I am sorry about that. But I really wanted to record today so I could get 2 videos up this week. I'm not making any promises, this is just a trial run, but I'm going to see how doing 2 videos a week goes for now. And yeah, I'm going to mix it up a lot. So this Saturday is going to be BJV horror, my own written works, and I think maybe any subscriber stories I get, so like stuff central to my channel. I think the Tuesday upload might be like Reddit stories, creepypastas, stuff like that, but like I say, this is just a trial. I can't stress that enough. I just want to see if I can do it, and how much like added pressure it takes, but like I might do it. So anyway, I'm sorry that I'm ill, and enjoy if you can. So today it's 3 true scary poltergeist stories. Number 1, my brother's apartment. My brother moved into a small, rough apartment in a rundown area of San Jose in California. He had just broke up with his long-term partner, and like everyone, he had his problems and his flaws, but overall, he was a good guy, and it was horrible seeing him so down. I originally offered to help him move in whilst I had a vacation from work, but seeing him struggle so much, I decided I'd stay with him for the first week, just while he settled in. The apartment was only a 1-bedroom sort of place, so I was put up on his couch, which came with the place and was rank. I was massively uncomfortable, but I did it for my brother. The first 3 or so nights went by easy and nothing out of the ordinary or spectacular occurred. We spent most of the days repainting some walls that had become stained or discoloured. The thing that I noticed first, anyway, happened on my 4th night there. I was sat in the living room, which had ipso facto become my room, and my brother was in his bedroom, which had become his private sanctuary. He was arguing with his ex, and I could hear most of the spat through the paper-thin walls. I tried to tune it out and kept reading my book. It got to the point that it was unbearable, and since I was in his apartment, I couldn't exactly shout at him to shut up. I kept reading, but also turned on the TV at a low volume. I had just about managed to tune everything out when I heard some of the steel utensils that hang from hooks in the kitchen begin to rattle. I was sandwiched between my brother's bedroom and the kitchen, so I knew it was empty. That, and I could still hear him arguing over the phone. I was a bit creeped out, but the first time I ignored it. Then it happened again, though this time it sounded as though some of the utensils had unhooked themselves and fell. I decided to take a look. I climbed off the couch and went across to the kitchen, turning the light on as I went in. There, on the floor, were 2 of the utensils, and the others were still swaying softly. I cautiously went over to them and picked the 2 up off the floor, placing them back on their hooks. I turned and re-entered the living room. The TV set was off. I know I didn't turn it off. The remote was lost, and I hadn't turned it off when I walked past. Curious, I turned the TV back on and it burst to life with the audio coming from full volume. I jumped and fumbled with the buttons to decrease the volume. As the volume lowered, I could hear the familiar sound of steel clattering against steel. I paused a moment, warily looking towards the kitchen. The darkness that emanated from it seemed cruel. Darker than usual, like staring into the void. Space seemed to slow as that horrible, deep, gut feeling of dread encompassed my entire being. Every single inch of me wanted to run, to turn and get my brother, or to turn and just leave. Couldn't. I had to know. Curiosity killed the cat. I edged forward to the kitchen and slowly slunked into the doorway that was the beast's jaws. I flicked on the light and couldn't block the scream. The utensils were swaying on their hooks once more, and all the drawers in the kitchen were open. Not the cupboards, though. Just the drawers. I began to cry when the TV cackled to life. The volume had again somehow increased itself. I rushed to turn down the volume as my brother rushed in to see what all the commotion was. I explained, not caring how crazy I sounded. My brother laughed it off as he closed the drawers in the kitchen, explaining that we had probably left them open. I explained, in vain, that I'd been in the kitchen, but he waved it off. I didn't get any sleep that night. The next night, me and my brother both woke to what we thought was the apartment being robbed. It was about 2 AM and loud clangs and shatters again emanated from the kitchen. I probably should have mentioned that the kitchen had no door and I could see the light was off from where I was lay on the couch and I couldn't see any shadows moving from within. My brother stormed out of his room, pistol in hand, shouting at the intruder. He went into the kitchen and turned on the light. He went silent and returned as pale as a sheet. He beckoned me towards him and I shook my head. "Please," he whispered. I shakily went towards him to see what had turned him a gaunt colour. I latched onto his arm and peered into the kitchen. It was trashed. The light fixture in the ceiling was swinging back and forth and the table was overturned. Cupboards had been emptied and broken pots and food were all over the floor. I shrieked and he let out a quick sob before stopping himself and composing. We both stood there, terrified, when a loud, sharp bang like that of broken glass came from behind us. We jumped and simultaneously turned to see smoke billowing out the back of the TV. It was an old fatback one for anyone wondering. I couldn't take it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We went to spend the night in a motel about 2 blocks away and returned the next morning to tidy the mess. Whilst my brother was sweeping in the kitchen, I became slightly overwhelmed and went to stand in the hallway outside of the apartment. I was approached by an older woman who scared me as I didn't notice her. "A lot of noise coming from this apartment last night," she said. My stomach dropped, a feeling I was used to at this point. She must have seen the look on my face as she added, "You weren't in, were you?" I shook my head. "I don't mean to pry," she continued, "and I'm not one to buy into such folly, but stranger things have been happening in that apartment since the first owners died," she said grimly. She was almost urging me to ask the next question, and I did. How did they die?" I asked shakily. "Murder-suicide. She shot him, then herself." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's best not to ignore these things, my love," the old lady stated, before walking off without another word. That was it. I left that afternoon and haven't been back since. My brother still lives there and says the activity is intense, but has plateaued out. He, somehow, just lives with it and still does to this day. Me? Well, even the thought of that place is me touching cloth. Number 2. The old play park near our house. When I was a kid, I lived in a suburban house with my mom and dad. I was a lonely child and there weren't many kids on my street either. My street was a cul-de-sac that ended with a peculiar playground for children. It was weird in that it was just situated at the end of a sleepy little road, and even weirder in that there were probably a dozen kids within a mile radius of the playground, and there were much better parks not much further away. It suited me though, as it was literally 2 doors down from me, and it was, by someone, well maintained. This park, I'm almost certain, was haunted by a poltergeist that I'd named Siggy, though I didn't know this at the time. Siggy, I thought, as did my parents, was an imaginary friend. At the time, it wasn't abnormal for me to assume imaginary friends could alter the real world. No one had told me otherwise. So, I'd be able to go to the park alone from a young age, due to its proximity to my home and due to the docile nature of my street. As such, I was left to my own devices, and what I saw, I assumed was normal. I'd sometimes arrive at the park after returning home with my mum to find Siggy swinging a swing or moving the roundabout. It's worth noting that I never saw Siggy. I just felt him. It was weird. I knew his gender and I somehow knew he was a child, but I never had a mental image of how he looked. He wasn't a tangible person, more an energy. So I'd see various playthings on the park, moving of their own accord, and though I couldn't see him, something always told me that it was Siggy. As time progressed, Siggy began to talk. More of a whisper, if I'm honest, an echoing, airy voice that travelled on the wind. I would hear him say things like, "Stay," when I had to leave, and "Come with me," whilst I was just playing. I liked Siggy for the most part, but he'd never leave me alone. Every time I went to the park, he would be there, waiting for me. It got to the point where I stopped visiting the park and became more reclusive at home. My mother obviously noticed this and basically made me go to the park so I wasn't in and bored all day. I reluctantly decided to go back. It was near tea time and was getting dark, and my mum said to be home when the streetlights came on. In the early evening dusk, even at such a young age, I realised my time was limited. The navy blanket of the night sky was creeping over the day like a tidal wave, and the streetlights would begin flickering on soon enough. I was bored and decided that I'd leave now and walk slowly to my house so as not to arouse suspicion from my parents as to why I was home early. I leave the play area, the rusty gate screeching shut as I exited. I'm about 10 paces away from the park when a strong wall of wind whips against my back, nearly pushing me forward onto my face. Siggy's voice, carried in it, louder and more intense than I've ever heard it before, telling me to stay. I felt a fury all of my own, and I turned and sternly said "No" at the top of my 6-year-old lungs. I was angry and a little frightened, but nothing could prepare me for the wave of emotion that swept over me as I glanced over to the park one last time. The roundabout was rotating faster than I thought possible. The tyre swing was swaying round and round in a circular motion, and the regular swings had been wrapped around the top bar, making them shorter. The thing that got me the most, though, was the ghostly apparition of a hanging boy. His bare feet swayed lifelessly in the evening breeze, his eyes black and dead. Then, as if a switch had just flicked right before my eyes, everything returned to normal. The roundabout was stationary and the swings unravelled. The apparition had gone. It had lasted maybe a couple of seconds, but it left a mental scar on me for a lifetime. I just started screaming in fear, tears gushing down my face. I ran home and refused to tell my parents what happened, leading them to believe, for a long while, that I was being bullied. I never, ever went to the park again, but during my childhood, I would sometimes look out of my bedroom window towards the park, and in the orange-hued lights of the street lamps, I could almost swear I could see the swings swaying in the still summer air. Was Siggy a ghost of a dead child, or something more malevolent attempting to form a connection with me? I'll never know for sure, but this is one chapter of my life. I'm glad it's over. Edit. A lot of you are asking questions, and that reignited my curiosity. I don't live in the same state anymore, but my parents do, and I went to visit them over the holidays. They live really close to the park, but not in the same house anymore. I went to the local library and searched our street name in the archive of the local papers. What I read honestly crushed me. It turns out a young boy didn't die there, but one child, who, for the record, wasn't called Siggy, but who I refuse to name out of respect, had been bullied. Back in the 60s when the park was first built, the two boys who had been bullying him invited him to the park where they tied an old TV cord around his neck and attempted to hang him from the swing set. Thankfully, a local neighbour intervened. The story in the paper didn't elaborate much on this, just that the child didn't die. But that got me thinking, maybe a dark energy lingered over the park. Though no one died, being the site of such an atrocious attack must carry something with it. I personally think Siggy was a demon, feeding on the event, the hurt, the pain, and using it to try and control me. I may be way off here, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' take on this new information. Number 3. My restaurant in the Cotswolds. Back in the late 60s, I attempted to open my own restaurant in the Cotswolds. After months of preparation and even longer scouting for a perfect location, I settled on a lovely thatched cottage that had ample outdoor space, located in Oxfordshire. The cottage was built in the late 1500s or early 1600s and was originally built as a larger family estate, later divided into 4 individual cottages. Once I had purchased the place, with a staggering amount of help from my uncle, I was re-renovating it into one large eatery. I was young, only 23 at the time, and was on the cusp of adventure, putting what little I had into this venture so as not to end up working as a chef for someone else or in a different trade altogether. I had dropped out of high school at 14 and managed to get work washing dishes at a restaurant. I had worked solid for just under a decade, training under some of the finest Michelin-starred chefs of the era. I was young, but was feeling like my life was coming to a pivotal point and decided that I needed to take my life into my own hands. You could say things were off from the start, but given my excitement and the humdrum of the renovation and other general busy business regarding the restaurant, certain things went not unnoticed, but they didn't immediately register as weird, or as weird as they were. Tools and materials would constantly move, specifically overnight, and would be found in the most peculiar of areas. Hammers and drills were found in the attic that no one had yet been in. Plastic pipes for under the sink were moved to other rooms in the building that never had a planned sink, rooms they had no reason to be in. And the weirdest of all, a £500, way more than it is now, professional microwave somehow removed itself from the locked building overnight, a building in which me and 2 other workers were sleeping in, and had been left in the front garden. Thankfully, it was undamaged and hadn't been stolen. All of these incidents were weird, but I don't think I, nor any of my work team, are stupid for assuming all these items must have just been mixed up in the confusion. With such a large team working on separate projects, a few mistaken overlaps and errors were bound to occur. However, things kept getting weirder during the renovation process. An upstairs window in a small box room that had been stripped and was entirely empty somehow broke on its own. It was a Sunday and only me and my uncle were in going over some designs when we heard it. We rushed upstairs to find the room still locked and empty. The window was almost an original, having been installed in 1722. Such a loss. Overall, the worksite phase should have been a sign, but we dismissed those phantom footsteps as a late worker returning for some forgotten item, and that creaks in the dead of night were a sign of the building's age. Strange things couldn't be dismissed so easily once the restaurant was finally open. In my older, more wise age, I have no shame or embarrassment in admitting that, in hindsight, I wasn't ready to open this restaurant. Business was slow, and in the first year we barely kept our heads above water and out of the red. Some days we would see perhaps a single customer a day, and as such, I had time to study the building and learn it. The new emptiness also meant that the strange occurrences I found myself experiencing and seeing couldn't be dismissed quite so easily. Now, in the basement of the cottage, I had made a wine cellar where we collected and stored a varied and expensive selection of rare and specialty wines, the oldest of which being a French red from 1899. You would walk down the stairs, which were located in a closet in the kitchen, and have to feel for a switch about halfway down in the dark. You would then be greeted by corridors of wooden wine racks running the length of the cellar, filled with bottles. It was comparable to a library's bookshelves for the wine connoisseur. So it's April, and my uncle had just told us that we had survived the financial year by the skin of our teeth, and I wanted to celebrate by popping a decent bottle. It was a moment of jubilation. Well, more relief, but we fancied a celebratory drink irregardless. I go to the closet and set off down the stairs, and as I'm reaching out for the light switch, the location of which I now know out of habit, I hear an almighty crash, followed by multiple thuds and the sound of thousands of pounds of wine being wasted. I finally turn the light on with just enough time to see the last rack crash to the floor, red wine covering the floor like an ocean of blood. I was breathing heavily and could see my breath. Impossible. The wine cellar was temperature controlled, given the delicate nature of the product. State of the art. Shivers covered my body like I was a hedgehog as I stood in shock, looking at the loss of money and decadence that now lay in ruins before me. Slam! The cellar door shut behind me. I ran up the stairs and turned the knob. It was locked. I began nudging, hitting and screaming. A sudden, uncontrollable fear that something was creeping up behind me wrapped around me. It felt like the darkness itself was enveloping me and I could feel tears welling. Creak. The bottom step on the old stair set creaked. At the very same time, a silence seemed to drop around me. I heard footsteps, slowly and purposefully, haul themselves up each step. Agonizingly slow and deliberately dreadful. The steps were right behind me now. I swear, I felt a breath on my neck when all of a sudden the door opened and I fell onto the floor and sprawled out at my uncle's feet, as pale, if you'll pardon the pun, as a ghost. I initially refused to go back into the cellar, but the extent of the damage was evident by the look on my uncle's face. At least 90% of the collection had been destroyed. Thankfully, the 1899 French red survived, and on a side note, was enjoyed with friends on a warm summer's evening in Monaco. I didn't tell my uncle what I felt, but he was still concerned as to how this whole thing had happened in the first place. Either he was experiencing things too, or he thought I had accidentally damaged the cellar. I never found out what he really thought, but based on things to come, I infer that he realised it wasn't me. Plates and glasses would slide off of vacated tables and smash. The people who had been dining there may have left 5 or so minutes beforehand, and this would occur as we went to clean the tables. Other things would smash too. Glasses that were hanging on racks would somehow physically slide off the rack and dart across the room, colliding with walls or exploding in a shower of glass on the stone floor. The activity, as I had dubbed it, became unbearable. Not only for me, my uncle, and the rest of the staff that began to feel anxious, watched, nervous, and paranoid whilst at work, but also for customers and patrons who were having experiences all of their own, and word around the village was beginning to affect business. I, financially and mentally, couldn't continue with the restaurant. The haunting was an attack on my soul, and the detrimental effects it had on the business, an attack on my wallet. I regrettably closed the restaurant just 2 years after opening. Still, until the very last hour of the very last day we were in that building, things happened. I remember being stood at the top of the stairs, my rolling suitcase in tow, when my uncle shouted me from what had previously been the kitchen area. I came down to aid, to see what he had wanted, and entered the kitchen area to be greeted by an empty, derelict room. I left the kitchen and stood in the old dining area and looked out of one of the small, tidy cottage windows. There was my uncle, loading crates into the back of a van. I rushed into the garden and quickly asked my uncle if he had shouted for me. He said no. I asked if he was just inside. He said he hadn't been inside for 10 or so minutes. Without uttering another word to him, I ran back inside just in time to see my suitcase flying down the stairs. Not tumbling, it just flew down the stairs, clearing each step by a few feet. I just picked it up, ran out, locked the door, and never looked back. Even when we were selling it, I left it to my uncle. I owed him most of the money back from the purchase anyway. Other than that, I've never really had any run-ins with the paranormal, but this haunting, which I now believe was a poltergeist, left a serious mark on my mental health as well as nearly destroying my professional life. Hey guys, really hope you enjoyed this video. Yeah, 3 true scary paranormal stories. 3 true scary poltergeist stories. Big video, good video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed some of them stories. That last one was super creepy. I don't know, I've always wanted to visit the Cotswolds, but I've never been. But like in my head, like from like the images I see, it's just like lovely. It is historic, but it's like this lovely place, and like having the like it juxtaposed with a haunting is like really creepy. And I really like the first story as well with like the haunted apartment. I know it seemed a bit like, when I was reading it, I don't, no disrespect to the author, I mean like what happened, it seemed a bit generic, but like it was actually a really creepy story, especially with the old woman at the end, because it's like, if she never saw her again, who was this old woman? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it yourself. Next Saturday's video is My Childhood Was Haunted, which is just one story, but it's very quite long, really quite long. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more, and peace out guys. Thank you so much. Bye.